Welcome to the Vault Podcast, classic music reviews, presented by IV Creative. Now, here's your hosts, B. Cox and the crew.
Greetings and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another edition of the Vault Podcast, classic music reviews. Presented by IV Creative, it's a perspective on the classics from a fresh point of view. We appreciate you for taking your time and lending your ears to our perspective. You could be anywhere listening to anything, but you're right here with us, so we thank you. With you today is yours truly, B. Cox, and today it's another segment of the Guest Lounge here in the Vault Classic Music Reviews podcast, and we have some very special guests here today. Very excited to interview these gentlemen that we have coming on here today. They've done some great work in the podcast space, particularly when it comes to hip-hop music, and they just finished a gripping and also very well produced and well done documentary, if you will, audio documentary and series on the making of Reasonable Doubt called Brooklyn's Finest. Of course, I'm talking about none other than the Breaking Atoms podcast by Sumit Sharma and Chris Mitchell, based over in the UK. These gentlemen did a great job, not just with the Reasonable Doubt series, but also with all the other artists that they've interviewed so far this year, rappers such as Big Pooh, Che Noir, OC, Fourth Disciple, amongst many others. So I got a chance to sit down with Sumit and Chris and ask them not only about the Breaking Atoms podcast, but about what made them hip-hop fans and how doing the Brooklyn's Finest Making of Reasonable Doubt series went for them. And joining us here in the Guest Lounge, as we mentioned here before, we have none other than the creators of the Breaking Atoms podcast. They do awesome work. These gentlemen joined us from out of the UK. Of course, we told you guys about the Reasonable Doubt series that they just did on their podcast, but I'm grateful to have both of them here. Of course, I'm talking about none other than Sumit Sharma and Chris Mitchell of the Breaking Atoms podcast. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us here in the Vault in the Guest Lounge.
Thank you for having us, man. This is a pleasure, man. We're fans of the show, so thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Oh, man. Thank you, man. I appreciate it. For you guys joining us, we got a little bit of a time difference, so I appreciate you all making the time in the afternoon over there in the UK. It's here in the morning here in DC on the East Coast. So, like I said, man, I am an admirer of hip hop culture and, of course, of podcasts, being a podcaster myself. I've only been doing it for about a year and a half now, coming up on 2 years. When you recognize great work in the podcasting space, you want to make sure that you recognize those folks and give them a shout out. I came across you guys' podcast as a result of hearing about the Reasonable Doubt series, because I had so many different other people. I followed Dart Adams on Twitter. A few other people were mentioning it, and I was like, oh, this is going to be a documentary, like an audio documentary on Reasonable Doubt. I got to check it out. So I listened to it right before we did our review of Reasonable Doubt a few weeks ago, and I was blown away, of course, by everything that did. And I was not only that, but I dug also deeper into the quality of the product that you guys had and so many of the different interviews that you did. I was blown away by the interviews that you guys did, man. So first of all, big up from one creator to the next for all the work that you guys have done and the work that you've done in this hip hop podcast space. Bravo.
Thank you, man. That means a lot. That really truly means a lot. This is a community of all of us. We're all striving to elevate the medium and to elevate the voices in it. So that means a lot coming from you. Thank you.
Awesome, man. Well, so we're going to get right into it. And so we're going to jump in and not necessarily talk about podcasting. This is hip hop, and we're all hip hop fans here. So every time I talk to creators and they're also in the music space and we're fans of hip hop, I also want to know what their journey was like as hip hop fans. So each of you, just give me, tell me a little bit about what your journey as a hip hop fan has been like. What were the first songs or albums or things that got you hooked into hip hop as a music and also as a culture? So either one of you can start.
Chris, go ahead.
I mean, like I was about 9 years old. I was quite socially awkward even back then. So I wasn't necessarily the cool guy. Didn't really get much love from the girls. So what I wanted to do was impress the older guys. So I really got into hip hop through the older guys. So we used to have school discos. And the first songs that I heard was MC Hammer, You Can't Touch This. That's what got me hooked. Okay. And then I saw Crisscross. And the reason why Crisscross impacted me so much is because we were similar in age. So seeing them saying, oh, you can be a part of this and you're not too young to be a part of this. So I would say that MC Hammer and Crisscross was almost like my lustful one night stand phase of hip hop.
Okay.
The lifelong love affair really began when I got a tape of Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers.
Wow.
So Chris Scott, Danny Hall, have to big them up all the time. They gave me a copy of the tape. It had incorrect songs because they would name the songs based on like the samples. So Tears was they called after the Tears, it was called Tears or After or something like that. And I went home and I learned the skits, and I was just this is me. Like this is who I am. And my one of my OGs, Sean Etienne, we used to go to his house, watch the box. He used to have the handwritten track list and tape videos from the box. So, I remember seeing Exhibit, Paparazzi, Nine, Lion King, Skilo, all these videos. And I remember he gave me, it was almost like a curriculum. He gave me Mobb Deep, The Infamous, 93 Till Infinity, Souls of Mischief, and a few others. Told me go home, listen to those. And, here I am. I became an MC a few years later, and I've just literally lost myself and found myself at the same time through hip hop culture.
Man, it sounds like your story is almost exactly like mine's, man. I mean, those titles that you're reciting right there are the same ones that I sort of came up with. I like to tell people that at a certain point, I was introduced to hip hop. I became intrigued by hip hop. I fell in love with hip hop, and then I couldn't live without hip hop. Those are my phases as it came in. So as you're talking about that Wu-Tang 36 Chambers, that's when I fell in love with it. I'd become infatuated with it and intrigued by it by the time I got to 90, 91. But by the time 95, 96 came around, I couldn't live the rest of my life without it, man. So that is an awesome, awesome story. Appreciate it. I could definitely relate to that. And Sumit, about you, man, your journey about hip hop, what were the songs or albums that got you hooked?
Yeah, earliest memories. I'm lucky because I have older brothers. So they would consume and buy and dub tapes on TDK and Memorex cassettes, and we'd have it around the house. Dog Pound was probably the earliest ones where I sneaked the cassette into the stereo system, and Dog Food rather from Dog Pound, and just blast that through. And that was that was me being naughty because no one was home. I was like, oh, let me just dig into my brother's collection, and I see this dog. He named it Dog Pound. I still got the cassette behind me. It's all handwritten and all that, nicely written, because that's what you did back in the day, right? It was penmanship, and you took care of those TDK cassettes. I also remember being, obviously younger, but they would always hear about NWA, fuck the police, but I understood what it was, right? It was just a catchy line for me. But it came, my love affair and understanding of hip hop started with Nas, The World Is Yours. Because Southeast Asian descent, I sipped the Don P watching Gandhi till I'm charged. I'm like, what? He's referencing someone from my head. This is my what the hell's going on here? And then it started from there, right? So 96, The Score, All Eyes on Me, Biggie, the very commercial traditional route. And then I started digging deeper, right? Cellar Dwellers or Exhibit, and then going into that kind of realm, and then going to HMV and the import section to buy the Tony Braxton, You're Making Me High or whatever, and then just live my life through that. And then I became the Jay-Z Hove stan that I just naturally became, and that's it. And I've been thankful to be part of this culture to study, and I've done a lot of going back and listening. So if it's Cold Crush Brothers, if it's Kool Moe Dee, you have to go back because I obviously wasn't around for that. And, even with Kane, one of my favorite MCs of all time is Big Daddy Kane, but I wasn't around to understand and fully understand his impact and what he, and the, I guess the place he has in hip hop. And part of me as a fan is to always make sure that he is always talked about as the greatest of all time, because he is for me. And, going into hip hop, into blogging, and into podcasting now, and just really my passion has always been music or is sport. So that's where I kind of gone into.
Interesting, man. Those stories. It's all, whenever you talk to hip hop fans, especially the ones who are really immersed into the culture, it's always interesting the path that they take, and then also the rappers and the artists or the producers that they follow that takes them along that journey. And as the hip hop changes, it's always interesting to see how that story never really changes, but only evolves based on who's coming into the game or who disappears and then who's no longer active and everything else. But those ones right at the beginning are really what stick with you. In particular, when you talked about Kane, I felt that way about Kane. I still feel that way about Rakim. As a matter of fact, when I ever talk about anyone that you want to consider like a true MCs, my Mount Rushmore are Rakim, Kane, Kool G Rap, and KRS-One. I tell a lot of people that when you look at MCs, anyone starting from 1980, I would say 1990 and on, you can pretty much take, I would say, about 70% of the MCs out there and trace them back to any one of their styles in some way, shape, form, or fashion. So interesting, fellas. Thanks for that. That is really, really great to hear. And I love being able to talk to hip hop heads and hearing that story from them. So you're a hip hop fan, Chris. You even said that you became an MC. You took your hand in MCing. I did the same exact thing myself. I also produced, and I started making beats when I was in high school, and then still produce music here and there, along with podcasting. But at some point in time, you go from just being a fan to really immersing yourself into a culture and becoming a storyteller, becoming a curator, becoming, in some sense, a lot of people will even say podcasting is like a form of journalism, depending on the type of podcast that you're doing. So when did the transition happen for you? And you transition to being not just a fan, but then going into digging into platforms and really becoming a critic, and then also really a storyteller of some of the things that have happened within hip hop? When did that transition happen for each of you?
Well, I have a journalism degree. So my degree is in new media and journalism, and ironically, I never became a full-time journalist. I worked at a national newspaper for a bit. I was in the sales department, and I tried to finagle my way from the sales department into the writing side, and I was effectively told, "Nah, that's not going to happen." Journalism is quite, it can be, particularly 10, 15 years ago, it's a very elitist space. Things have definitely improved, but it was quite elitist. And in all honesty, I just gave up. So I let that dream go. I did some writing for some smaller websites in that time. So I would review like live shows. So I wrote about Lord Finesse, Pharoah Monch. Sumit will tell you more about his adventures in journalism. But Sumit even called on me one day to interview Odyssey for his platform. So what I was doing instead of writing and being a journalist per se, I really immersed myself. I spent 15 years in my room just reading liner notes, connecting dots, and just really getting into the stories behind the music. Why did this person go to this studio? Who's Anton Pashansky? What does he do? So I start to get into this universe. You're from Baltimore, so think of it like The Wire. All the different characters that are introduced from season to season and how they all intersect and intertwine. That's what my journey was like. And my podcasting thing, I'll be honest with you, man, I was in a very dark place a couple of years ago. I was made redundant from my work, going through some serious depression. Wow. Let's call a spade, suicidal thoughts as well. Wow. And I remember sitting with my wife, and she said to me, we were watching the wrestling. I'm a big wrestling fan. And I started to call the spots. And she's like, how do you know this stuff? And I just said, because I'm a storyteller. I know what's going on. I know how it's going to end. Exactly. So she's like, you need to start a podcast. So long story short, she bought me a ticket to a podcast festival. I went there. I just embedded myself in it, asked questions. I knew Sumit wanted to start a podcast. We got talking. And, Breaking Atom started. But to be honest with you, Brian, it's only since we've done the series, which we'll talk about shortly, the Reasonable Doubt series, that I really thought, oh, snap. Chris, you're actually a journalist now.
Snap, absolutely.
15 years after getting that degree. And almost having to wait for someone to validate you and give you a job and say you're good enough. You were always good enough. Like the nature of this project that we've just done, it's journalism. Like we've extracted jewels and nuggets and gems from history and told them in a way that everyone can understand. So I've only been calling myself a journalist for the last maybe 6 weeks. That's just how I got there. A naturally inquisitive nature and a passion for history and accuracy and sharing the culture and making sure the right people get their props and knowing that we're creating content for those people who are going to come after us. We're not going to be here forever, but this audio will be. So that's, I feel we have a mandate, a divine responsibility to make sure the stories are told in the right way.
Wow. It's crazy, man, because your first part when I asked you about your hip hop journey as a fan, it was almost like mine's. Your story since then has been like mine's too. Wow. I graduated with a journalism degree from Morgan State, which is my alma mater. I went through the same thing that you went through. No job in the newspaper industry. The print industry in across the world, but especially in the U.S., was starting to die. So I gave up on that. And here I am finding myself all these years later, finding another way to be able to tell stories. And I talked to my journalism professor from undergrad, and he told me, I was like, I know, I turned out to be this big disappointment. You trained me to be a good journalist and do all the good things that a journalist could do. He was like, well, you're doing the same thing now. He said, you're doing the same thing what we did. You're telling stories. He said, a lot of this stuff, whether it's reporting, whether it's being given commentary on particular topics, you're doing the same exact thing. He's like, this is just another medium. It's not in a written word, but the words and the stories are what matter. That's what matters. And in journalism, the stories are the only thing that's matter. That's it. So, wow, awesome. And Sumit,
Your same question for you.
Yeah, so it kind of really began. I did an English degree around 15 years old. I was thinking about career and what I wanted to be, and journalist was the thing, right? The Guardian, is a big paper over here. I thought I had aspirations of doing that. Then went into kind of working, and I always had this. I've always wanted to tell stories and wanted to be a journalist. But around 2007, I did a broadcast journalism postgrad at City University, and it taught me a lot about audio production and TV and how things work, etc. And also around that time, rap was getting a bad rap in the mainstream media, and I felt like the story and the culture of hip hop was being kind of dragged through the mud, and I didn't like it. And I felt like I wanted to create a platform and a space where we could tell the real story, not the thing you hear on the news where they go, oh, these rappers are killing each other or they're promoting violence. Well, actually, hip hop is peace, love, and having fun. If we're going to take the KRS line, so I started a blog called at the time called Colonized Minds, which is a play on Frantz Fanon's book Black Skin, White Masks, and it evolved into Hip Hop Chronicle. And from there, it was a blog that turned into, I gave myself a salary at some point. I was taking myself and earning money and taking myself to America and interviewing, Nas, AZ, Method Man, Rick Ross, Shine, featured on Rolling Stone, Entertainment Weekly, MSN, Hot 97. I used to do PR for a lot of artists. And what I did with Hip Hop Chronicle was really show myself and people who couldn't give me a job. People at the BBC who didn't want to employ me, people at the Guardian who didn't want to employ me. I was like, well, I'll show you what I'll do. And I just started building and learning on the job, learning about digital marketing, learning about social media platforms, learning about website coding. So this little WordPress blog took me to places where when I'm interviewing Russell Simmons, the people after me are BBC. These are the same people who wouldn't give me a job. And so I just started creating and going through a lane where I was like, oh, I have a purpose now. I have a purpose to showcase hip hop in the greatest light I can, and to learn more and to study more and to interview my heroes, which I did. My breakout was Ice Cube. I guess my first video interview was Ice Cube, which he mentioned 50 Cent, who then saw it and talked publicly about it. And all of a sudden there's this kid from the UK, from West London, Southall, born and raised, and he's like all over the internet and being viral. And I realized at that point where the power of what I could do digital marketing, but also the power of hip hop. And I learned so much, and I went through, and that lasted a good intense 4 years. And then after that, I just started going, well, hold on, I guess the purpose I have, not everyone necessarily shares. And so I started to see the smoking mirrors, and I started seeing how polluted and how diluted the industry, quote unquote, can be. So I took a step away. Wow. But I always had aspirations of just going, I'm going to come back one day. And the birth of my daughter and just life in general and just learning, it just made me think, right, we need to do this podcasting because this is the new blogging. In some ways, this is how things have evolved and transitioned. I'm a product of the blog era. I love that. I learned so much from that. But now it's about how do we elevate, how do we transition, and that's where we get into breaking atoms and taking the purposeful tact to kind of interview and go to our roots, which is hip hop, and then into the series. But it really started from a blog. This is all of me being, and I guess in entrepreneurial spirit is where I learned how to do all these things and to foster those relationships. All me. I didn't have any ins. I didn't have a DJ I knew at a radio station. I didn't have the cousin here. This was just a boy from London. I interviewed Nas in my bedroom. Like, this is crazy, right? Yeah. Like, I'm talking to people this is nuts. And I had to get an ISDN line so that I could get the better quality, and I had to look my dictaphone. And I did an interview with Kid Cudi. Wireless, my monitor cracked, so I had to get this old one, which is like old IBM from the 80s. Connect that. It took like 12 hours to export because it was running slow, but that was the grind. That's what you had to do. And I was fortunate to, at the time of doing Hip Hop Chronicle, I was fortunate to understand like music and hip hop will give you the greatest. It will give you the best and greatest insight into who people are, because when you're running around in the industry, you'll meet groupies, managers, producers, stage managers, engineers, artists, managers of artists, partners, all of that in one short space of an event. And you've got to deal with all these different people. Yeah. And that accelerates how you deal with people and your people skills. Absolutely. Something that, going to university can help with, but it won't give you that. It won't accelerate that. And I learned so much that I can now take that and go, right, Breaking Atoms. Let's take this, Chris. Let's go and let's take this and elevate the culture. Both me and Chris share that. We share that kinship in how do we take something that is so important to people of color from across the world. How can we shine the best light without being contrived, without being inauthentic? We are authentic as we are. Who we are, what you see and what you hear is who we are. How do we take that and give hip hop the best light it can be?
Wow. Yeah, man. It's people don't necessarily they see the diamond, they don't necessarily see the rock that you had to blast to get it, you know, and that's the grind, as you talked about, Sumit, and you as well, Chris. I was speaking to a fellow podcaster of mine, Nathan Rodell, by the way. Shout out to the professor, who is the creator of Players from the South, which is a fictional hip hop podcast. For you two, I definitely, and anyone out there, any of my listeners and viewers, if you haven't checked it out, definitely check out Players from the South. It's a fictional hip hop podcast based on a Southern hip hop mogul and his journey basically to be honored after all his years of service. Nathan said that he spent so many different years trying to find a job in media. And then when he found out and said after a while of doing this podcast, he had a similar one that he had started before then, that he said, it took me some time to understand that, you know, what I am doing is media. This is media. I am media already. So in the terms of both of you all, what you said, if there isn't a way, then make a way. And for the journey that all three of us have been on, and any of the people that have been in this space that have gone through the same thing, this is really a way of making a way. So kudos to both of you on that, because I know what it means. It takes a lot of perseverance and strength to be able to get through something like this, especially when the things that you may try may not work at first. So it can be discouraging at times. So you mentioned Sumit, Breaking Atoms. So we'll get into that, man. How did the idea of that podcast come about, and how long of a process was it to come from that first concept, those discussions, until you got into launch and got the thing rolling and off the ground?
So I think me and Chris would meet up often to have some pasta at a restaurant in London called Vapiano's. And we would just talk rap, and we would just talk life, and it would just be a wide span, you know, a wide ranging span of conversation and topics. And hip hop was one of those. And I think it was at that point where I think Chris wanted to do a podcast. I had wanted to do podcasting for a number of years prior, but I was holding myself back because I was like, well, everyone thinks it was Hip Hop Chronicle, and I don't want it to be like that. And I was going through mentally, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to, because when it's go time, it's go time for me. I just felt like for me personally, I wasn't ready. But we came to, I think it was at Vapiano's upstairs, there's an upstairs area there. And we just went, let's just do a podcast. And we started bouncing around names, and we had different names. And some of them will come to light at some point, and some of them we'll use at some point. Absolutely. And then in terms of the name and where it came about, it was very much about what do we want to stand for? And that's how Breaking Atoms came about, because it's about getting under the hood of certain things. And then from that point onwards, once we had the name, it was go time. Like we were just like, right, let's go to the studio. We shared one mic at a studio to begin with. Chris he'll tell you, I had the sofa. He had the WWE chair.
Yeah, hard chair.
The hard chair. Like, yeah, okay. And we just rocked from there. And we would talk about, our first episode is The Wire versus The Sopranos. And we there's other episodes about how to deal with office life and how to deal with mental health and the impact of social media. Because while we sat in that restaurant talking about rap music, to us that feels, and not to be very egotistical about this, but it's kind of easy to do that. We can sit and talk with fellow rap heads, not saying that we know everything, because absolutely no, that's not the case, but we can sit there and conversate with regular like-minded people. That's easy. So we started to take that tack of going, let's talk about things that impact our lives and would impact in other people's lives and be relatable. And then slowly we moved on, and we were like, let's just go to what we know, which is hip hop. Right. So to answer your question, and Chris, feel free to tag anything on, it didn't take that long once we went, let's do this. It might have been a few weeks, maybe a month or so before we got into the studio, and then we were recording every week. And we would do, we would schedule in advance. Let's knock out 3 episodes right now. Boom, let's do that. Yeah. And so that'll give us time to go, right, we'll be in the studio, in the next 3 weeks, and we just move from there.
Yeah, cool. I mean, everything, that's it. That's exactly how it happened. We recorded, I think, 6 episodes in one day.
Wow.
That's how we were moving. I remember when I went to that podcast festival, it was the end of November 2017, and first episode of Breaking Atoms dropped like end of Jan, but it was recorded like 2 weeks before, so it was really quick. I still have the notes from that festival actually, and I actually wrote on the notes, speak to Sumit about music, theme songs, and topics and stuff. So yeah, the ball was already in motion. I think we were a podcast before we decided to become a podcast. Some of the best conversations we've ever had were never recorded.
Yes,
over pasta. So
isn't that the way it always works out, though? You know,
absolutely.
It's like you're having a conversation
with voice, though.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Great. Yeah, those conversations definitely help you find your voice. But it's funny you have those conversations with your boys, and you're like, we should be recording this. Like, was somebody recording this? Did somebody get to know? Okay, all right. Well, we'll see if we can replicate it again. But it's never as raw as when you're in the moment, though, and you find a way to make it. And it's amazing what you can do when you're motivated. You said you guys did 6 episodes in one day. The most we ever did with my podcast was 3 at the most, and that's when we were doing it at my kitchen table in my old house. We would get together, have a couple of beers, and we would talk reviews. We would line up the reviews. Okay, guys, we're doing this 3 albums in this day. And the motivation was getting them planned out so that we didn't have to meet up every single week to record, and this was actually pre-COVID when we started this. So no, I definitely get that, but getting the grind of getting it off the ground and moving. Have you guys been surprised in some of the feedback that you've gotten since the podcast has started? What has the feedback been like, and have you been surprised by some of it, especially the positive feedback that you've gotten?
Yeah, I think all feedback is good because you get to hear people's perspectives and what either irks them or what really they love about it. Generally speaking, the feedback for Breaking Atoms as a podcast is always been positive. And I think that's probably because there might be some haters out there. That's fine. Shout out to you. But I think it's really because we are trying to be who we are. We are not being anyone else. And the conversations we have, we don't come in with this whole idea that we know everything. We come in with an open mind going, this is how we feel about this. This is what we think about this. We're open to discussion, and that's it. And I think it also helps that both of us come from a journalistic background. So when we're interviewing people, whether it's a writer, whether it's an A&R, whether it's a manager, whether it's a producer, whoever it is, it's all about the focus that we have, which is documenting the culture. It's not about us; it's about the subject. And I think that resonates with the listener, because now the listeners know that when they listen to Breaking Atoms, it's not about my personality or Chris's personality, because that will shine regardless. It will shine through regardless, because that's who we are. Really, it's about the subject and uncovering their story, because that's the key. That's what we're all interested in. That's why there's so many serial killer documentaries on Netflix. We're intrigued by the mind. We're intrigued by what happens. It's an innate thing that we all have, this curiosity. Some people are more curious than others, but we're really trying to figure out what makes us tick. And that, taking that approach into podcasting and to the most authentic medium that we have, which is audio, I think that resonates with the listeners, and that's why the feedback is so good.
Yeah, I'm still surprised sometimes by the feedback and just how Breaking Atoms adds values to people's lives. Like Sumit said, it's not about us. We're just telling the story, but to have people who listen every week, and this is part of their media diet. This is how they get through their week by listening to our show. Like, I'm always surprised by that. I remember when it launched, and a young girl who I worked with, and I hired her. It was a trip. She actually came into the interview and said, "You look familiar," and started reciting one of my songs. It was nuts. She messaged me when she saw the podcast, and she messaged me and she's like, "I'm so glad you're doing this, because this is who you are and this is who I know you to be." And that meant a lot to me, because I feel after the struggles that I went through just with confidence and self-esteem prior to starting the podcast, to have people reach out and say, I love this show. Wow. I listen to this show every week. Sumit's presence with Hip Hop Chronicle introduced me to an audience, and vice versa and stuff. And it's like, just have people say, yeah, this works. It's, I'm a wrestling fan. This is Hawk and Animal. This is Brett and Jim. This is that.
The Bushwhackers.
Yeah, Luke and Butch. Do you know what I mean? This is that. We are
Paul and Ash.
Come on, man. We're talking now, innit? Don't get me started. We're talking now. So always surprised and humbled by the feedback and just how people really love this show and what it stands for.
Wow. Yeah, man. I definitely agree with that. And it's funny when you're creators, and I can relate to that, when eventually you know that you've made your way into people's regular routine, whether it's daily or monthly or weekly, that they make a habit of being able to listen to you. And it's humbling from a certain perspective to be like, somebody takes time out of their routine to tune into my medium every single time I release something new. And I've dealt with that with some of the feedback I've gotten on social media. Like, I missed a couple of weeks one time, and a guy was like, "Yo, man, what's going on? Is everything okay?" When you get to that point in people's lives that they count on what it is that you're doing, like you said, it's not about you. It becomes about the art. It becomes about the people that depend on that art and the people that look for it for a certain sense of whether it brightens their day or takes their mind off of something or entertains them, even to a certain extent. So I can definitely relate to that. So now we're going to get into the big thing, what really drew me to you guys in the first place, and that is the Brooklyn's Finest series, The Making of Reasonable Doubt. Really a crown jewel, definitely something that any creator would be very, very proud of, and something that you all should be very proud of, which I'm sure you are. And the feedback on it has been absolutely amazing. Take us a little bit into the process of making that a reality. There were a lot of moving parts when it came to that. I mean, you guys interviewed so many different great people: Clark Kent, Ski, Maria Greens from Mad Wednesday, Pain in the Ass, who I didn't even know who his name was because I had heard him on all these different Jay-Z albums, everything from Reasonable Doubt to Volume 1, 2, and 3. And I didn't even know who the guy was. But now I know who I am. And you all actually did a separate interview with him as well as a follow-up to what happened on Reasonable Doubt. So, but all these different people who were involved, the writers from the source, just give us an idea of what it came to make that a reality, and dealing with all the moving parts to be able to make something like that come together. It couldn't have been easy, man, but just give us some insight as far as how you all made it happen.
Yeah.
Sumit, you take this one.
So the idea to do documentaries is one we've had for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Like we've already said in this interview, we're always looking at how we can elevate. And so that was a natural progression. In terms of the series itself, it really started with there were other documentaries where we were going to do first outside of Reasonable Doubt. But then we looked at, Chris was like, "Hey, 96 is a good year." And I was like, "Oh yeah, of course." And he's like, "Oh, it's 25 years of these albums, right?" Because you had The Score, you had All Eyes on Me, and people making such a big noise about that. And then we went through scrolling through what came out in 96. It was like, Reasonable Doubt. Oh my God, how did we? I mean, for me as a host, and that I should be ashamed of myself, because how did I not know that was the 25th year anniversary? And it started from there really, and it was a lot to do. And from almost start to finish, it was about 2 months. So from recording the first kind of interview right through to this is done now was 2 months, which is from what we understand is kind of it's virtually unheard of to do that at that level. 5 episodes, because something like that can take months and months and sometimes a year. Yeah. So really, it was very much around what's the story we want to tell, and who do we want to identify. And through that, we were conduits through the contributors, because what we were hearing from them were like, "Oh, we need to speak to this person," or actually, no, we need to change our tack completely. And 4th episode wasn't going to be about family and community; it was very much going to be about lyrics. But when we started speaking to Pain in the Ass and Maria and Ski, this thing just kept coming out, which was family, family, family. And so while we were doing the actual series, we went, we have to change tack. This episode can't be about his lyrics anymore. It has to be something different. And so there's 2 of us. And so we really sat down and gone, how do we map this out? And we just on throughout the process evolving, going, this is how we're going to just chop and change this. We'll put this bit here. Actually, this will be the end. And actually the way in which I've always worked, even Hip Hop Chronicle, one of the things that helped me stand out from a lot of the people in the space was I would go to Drake's first concert and it would end and I'd be editing on the way home, and within an hour that 10-minute piece of video rather of that concert would be on the internet. It would be that quick. Wow. So I'm always editing in my head. I would know Okay, and you cut here. And Chris is probably the same as an MC, as a musician. This music needs to go here, right?
Yes.
This is what we're going to, as a writer. And so while we're doing the interviews, we're making mental notes and mental markers. You ever used any Logic, Adobe Audition, anything? You got markers. We're already making mental markers of what we need and what we don't need. And so that process of editing is already streamlined in that. So for anything, while it was a lot to do with a lot of moving parts, this was fun as hell to do. It was a lot. It was intense. But
sounds like it.
By golly, and I'm gonna say golly because I'm English. It was hilarious and it was amazing, and it was one of the kind of most rewarding things that I think we will do for a very long time, because it really set the standard of what we should do going forward. But also, we learned so much. We learned so much from everyone we spoke to, from people who were part of the album and outside of the album, the journalists, the respected voices in the culture. It's a lot. It's not. I can't give all the source away because then everyone will just do exactly what we do, right? So,
right, of course.
I'm going to be like Primo and bring it on. I'm not going to tell you everything,
of course.
but it was very much, you know. There's also the other thing of we've sat with this album, we know this album. Yeah. Right. So we know how that story goes. And then everything else is just filling it in.
Yeah. Of course, anything to add?
I mean, look, Sumit's nailed it, man. I feel what we've done is definitely unheard of, because when we tell people it took us 2 months, they're looking at us like we're aliens. Like, really? I think it's a case study in like perseverance and trust and teamwork. As I look back, you know, how the roles kind of naturally fell in place. Like, Sumit did an amazing job with the sequencing, and the storytelling. And I think to give him more credit, it comes from, I was taken aback because he put it together like it was an album. And as someone who grew up listening to albums, I'm like, yo, like, he put it together like an album. And I know he's big on sequencing, so it was fun to see how all those years of learning came about in this piece. You know, even with the script writing, you know, we wrote the script together, and honestly, I found the script easy to write. Not only because I know this, but I found out all the transferable skills we have. So from writing songs, journalism background, writing journals and all that, writing the script was, you know, dare I say, it was light work, because we knew the story. And one thing we wanted to really focus on is, how do we make this story appeal to people who don't know or care about this album or Jay-Z? You may hate rap music, but are you going to listen to this? And I feel we've done a good job with that, because the story itself is it's the classic come up of an underdog. Everybody loves a story like that. Everyone. And, you know, I'm very proud because we've told the story. He's more than Beyonce's husband, and Beyonce's amazing, but this is one of the greatest come up stories in human existence. Not just rap, human history. You'll never see another Jay-Z. And the last thing I want to add is, when I moved into my new place where I'm sitting right now, about 5 years ago, we went for dinner with our neighbors, and, you know, we got into what I was into, and us, you know, talking about rap music, and I'm into Jay-Z and stuff, and she was like, oh, but he's a drug dealer. And she just dismissed him. And in the back of my mind, when we were making this, I'm like, I made it with the venom, respectful venom for this person, that if she was to ever hear it, she would respect the story a bit more, because I wanted to prove people like her wrong and show the nuances in the story, and what it takes to make an album of this kind of quality that we look at 25 years later and say it's the soundtrack to our lives, literally.
It's all the tools in the toolbox that you guys had, you took out and used it on this series. And it's documentary in nature, right? But it's almost even like a feature film, like a motion picture to me, because you have everything. You start from the beginning. You start from Jay at the very beginning when he's starting his career with Jaz-O, and as being sort of like that, as you could, if you could say sidekick, I guess you could be companion to Jaz-O, who has established himself more, and this kid who's really trying to make his bones, to being able to try to get a record deal, to finding himself with Dame and Biggs and starting his own record label, to having these songs ready, to getting these producers to come by to work on this album, them working on the album, but not really knowing that they're working on the album, and then putting this masterpiece together that comes out and is fairly well acclaimed when it comes out. But in the 25 years that it's passed, in my podcast, and as you all said as well, the mythology of it has grown almost 1,000 times since then, to where, if it was a 4-mic album in the source, comparatively speaking, to at this point it's now being considered among one of the best of all time, and it's undeniable in its quality how good it is. How it really is like a motion picture the way that you all laid it out. I mean, it's documentary in style, but it really does follow all the tools that you would have if you were building a motion picture, and the storyline of a major player and a major character, and following that through the end to where you have the payoff at the end. And that's what the end is. It's what Reasonable Doubt has become in those 25 years. That was the masterpiece of this podcast series that you all put together, is the payoff at the end. You really bring everything full circle, everything from all the stories that started from episode 1 to episode 5. So that was awesome job.
That was intentional, right?
Yeah.
So Chris kind of talked about a bit of the source there in terms of sequencing. Sequencing is important and storyboarding is important, but also pacing is as important.
Very.
When we're talking about things like this, you have to get the right pace. I think a journalist I know, Mickey, he messaged me and he was like, "You've paced this like as if Hove was rapping it." It's all intentional. It has to be intentional because you have to think about the subject. This isn't about me and Chris. This is about the subject now.
The subject.
This is about the people that we're speaking to. If you notice, there's nothing apart from our voices and in the script and the voiceover. That's it. You don't get nothing else from us because it's not about us. It's about what this album represents, the people who are a part of it. And I think in some ways, while that is part of the source, it was easy enough to do with Reasonable Doubt because the story is there. It is like a motion picture. You start here, you have your trials and tribulations here, and then you have this resolution here. It's no different to a Shakespearean play, right? You have that. It's inherent. And so we were lucky in that. We were very lucky in that, but it's all purpose. There is an intention to everything we do. And it's good to hear that people like yourselves and respected people like yourselves see that too, because that was very intentional.
Yeah, it really was, man. You all had a lot of stories, a lot of things that you pulled from interviews from the different players that were a part of the making of this album. Give me, each of you, a couple of the more interesting things that you learned that you didn't know probably going into the series. And, we're not going to give the whole thing away because we want everybody to go and listen to it. But just give me maybe, one or two things that were interesting that you found out, that you didn't know going into it.
I think for me, it was the bonus tracks and the tracks that were left on the cutting room floor. Clark Kent mentioned, Tell Me How It Feels featuring Black Widow. I'm like, who? What? Like, just when you consider the age we live in with the internet and these songs still haven't leaked, I think it's a testament to just how precious and protected the legacy of Reasonable Doubt is. So those bonus tracks, I would love to hear them one day. I know there was a snippet of 95 South, there being a solo version of Brooklyn's Finest, No More Mr. Nice Guy. But that tape's gone missing. You hear oftentimes, I remember Just Blaze saying how, studios would throw out reels. So think about all the classic material that's just been, thrown out. I can imagine someone at Giant Studios, No More Mr. Nice Guy, JD, we're closing the studio, gone. So it's kind of just those bonus tracks. I'm really intrigued. I'm really intrigued in them because I didn't know they existed. I thought this thing was, 14, 15 songs, lean, recorded, everything's good, out the door. But I would love to hear them. That was a really interesting story to me.
Wow. Yeah. That whole thing it sort of reminds me of that Universal fire that happened where, Reza in particular was talking about a lot of the master stuff that he lost and the result of that, in particular, like things that happened with Supreme Clientele and a couple other for classic albums. It's just like, wow, those are things that you can't ever recover ever again. Once those things are gone, who knows what happens to them unless they were destroyed. Where are they? Like lost treasures. We're looking for lost treasures, and it's very interesting, man. Sumit, something interesting that you found out.
There were a few. I think definitely the tracks that didn't make the album, like Tell Me How It Feels. I didn't know about that. I didn't know about the original song titles for Brooklyn's Finest, but there were questions in there that I've always wanted to know that Jazzo, kind of helped fill the gaps, which was on Jazz's album when they recorded it in London. Jay-Z appears as courtesy of Josh Productions. I never knew who Josh Productions was. And it was a production deal that Jazz had, and he talked about that. And, there was conflict of interest, but everything was fine. The other one I never knew, and I always wanted to know, was Lil Lulu Music, which was Jay-Z's first publishing company name. Never knew who Lil Lulu was. And Jazz was like, you know, you got to pay for this information. He was saying to her, you got to pay for this information, right? And he said that was Jay-Z's mum's nickname. And he named his first publishing company. You know, that's why they around the block they used to call it Little Lulu. Wow. And see, those are things that's why this was such a you know, rewarding project, because we got to ask things that we wanted, burning questions we wanted to know. Sure. And we got that off, and we got to really understand and fill those gaps in. So those, I guess, those were the ones that would stick out to me. And also just I think it was Bring It On. One of the songs that was supposed to be a hard pack record. My memory fails me.
Cashmere Thoughts.
Cashmere Thoughts.
Now I didn't know that record was supposed to be a hard pack record, which was a group with Jazz, Source, and Jay.
Money. Yeah.
And I didn't know that, right? So when we talked to Clark Kent about hard pack, he was like, "Yo, Jazz told you about hard pack." Like, that was a crazy thing about when we spoke to people. When we spoke to people for this project, they were they were like, "You spoke to Joe Quindy? Like, you spoke to Jazz about hard pack?" Like, even they were surprised, and actually they were speaking to each other at the same time. Like, Maria were like, "Yo, I spoke to Ski to make sure you were verified." Like, this was a real thing, and I think for the guys, for us, we learned a lot about the project and the inner workings of what happened. But for those guys over there who were part of the project too, they were just like figuring stuff out. They didn't know that we were pulling out. Like, no one's spoken to Joe Quindy for a long time. So, you know, and there's a lot of stuff that's on the cutting room floor that we just had to cut out. We just had to cut it out. There was no way to fit it in to fit with the 30-minute kind of time frame. And that was some editorial decisions that we had to make. Yeah. And to give a little bit of insight, after the first episode dropped, the response was so crazy that I went back and went, I'm re-editing the epison 2. Wow. So episode 2, which was dropping like a few days later, I went, no, I'm going back, and we're shaving 5-10 minutes of. I think we end up I shaved on maybe 7 minutes, 6.5 minutes.
7 minutes or so.
So I was like, no, this has got to be perfect now. This is crazy. So I went back and did that, and then boom, put it out, got it mixed and mastered, everything.
6 to 7 minutes of audio is a lot, man. That's a lot.
So it was sitting there mulling, going, okay, this might have to be for the deluxe version. This might have to be for the director's cut. This might have to be. You know what we should do, Chris? Is we should just do this. We should do a Chris Mitchell cut and a Sumit Sharma cut, and just have like 2 different cuts, right?
But that's what we did for the trailer. For anyone who wants to know, people ask why were there 2 versions of the trailer, side A and side B. It's because Sumit and I both, we had different ideas on the music at first. So we were like, listen, let's just do it like a vinyl. Like Biggie, Juicy's the A side, Unbelievable's the B side. So the A side, you can see it's a lot more modern, cleaner production, and the B side was a bit more gritty. So you can just see I think you can see and hear our love for music and just how we apply the tenets from that world into this world. And like Sumit said, with the editing and cutting it down, I think one of the biggest things we've learned is you got to be ruthless with the editing. Yeah, there's some stuff, like, not to boast and brag, but there's some stuff they told us. Yeah, like, we were just like, yo, we're gonna have to double back and do an interview with you in a bit, because we don't want this stuff to be lost to history. Right. But it's it was amazing. Like, such a fun thing to be a part of, and I'm just honored and humbled to know that, you know, Sumit and I were a part of it. It doesn't go.
It's crazy. Like, I you know, after the project and during the project, I'd call Maria Davis. We just talk. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I get more insight into things and other people who are part of the project that we didn't get to speak to. Like, it's mad what that sparked. What this project sparked is incredible. I don't think either one of us thought it would have the adulation that it has had. That's why that's why I went back and I said, I'm doing episode 2 again. I'm doing that again, because I was like, nah, it can't be this. And that's a credit to everyone who shared it, to credit to all the contributors, everyone who shared it, from Dart Adams that you mentioned and everyone else, because we shared the success with them. This isn't just us, it's with them too, because if it wasn't for the people that took part, this wouldn't be a success. It would just be 2 guys talking about it, which would be great. We shared the success with all of those people.
Yeah, I was going to use a little bit of a crude reference in regards to what happened after episode, but it's like, so instead of using a drug reference, I'm going to use like a food reference. So, you know, you're at a bakery, and so you make a pie or a cake, and the first time that it comes out, that, you know, that person brings that pie and that cake and they give it to 5 or 6 of their family members. Those people rave about it to 4 or 5 of their friends. They all come rushing in to be able to go get us this pie and cake. And that might have been, okay, the product was good, but I know that I think that I could perfect it a little bit more. Like I can take the icing and maybe perfect the icing a little bit more. So then you have people come rushing through the door and rushing through the door and rushing through the door for this pie, for this cake. And it's almost like, damn, the product blew up overnight. And I know that if I can put this out, if I can perfect this a little bit longer, I'll really have something. So it's almost like you guys had, that's almost like what happened. Like the word got out and you were like, oh shit. Episode two was definitely, I got to go work on this because now the word is out. The word is definitely
literally
out.
like that. It was literally like that. I remember when we put out episode like trailer and episode 1, and I'm looking at the responses online, and I remember saying to Sumit, I've never been a part of something like this. I'm an MC, whatever. I have my little cult following. It's cool. I love them, but just to see the trajectory and the numbers, I've never seen something like this. We thought it would be good. We were confident in our product. No drug reference. We were confident in our cake and the icing.
Yeah, there you go.
But the public, like people like yourselves and the contributors, really, really championed it. I think I'm gonna use the word, they championed that.
Good, awesome,
and made us, and they legitimized us in this space, in this particular type of production.
Hey man, you guys had some heavy hitters on there, man. I hadn't heard anything from Maria Green, man, in the years since then. And I had heard about Mad Wednesdays, reading about it, and also seeing videos about what Mad Wednesdays used to be about. I told you, Sumit, before we came on about Ski and my admiration for him. My admiration for Clark Kent goes way, way beyond just being a fellow MC. And then from a producer standpoint, there's so many things I respect about him. But when you get those folks on to talk about the making of the album itself, it's sort of like you said, legitimizes what it is that you're producing, because you have the people who were there, in the battle right there, creating everything. So I can definitely relate to that. So it's funny that we bring this up. You guys just finished a Reasonable Doubt series, and you're going to be jumping right back in with another series coming up later on this year. You have a series coming up about the Blueprint, following the Jay-Z motif. Blueprint is turning 20 years this year on, ironically enough, on 9/11. I remember being in undergrad and going actually to go get Blueprint when it came out on 9/11, and then 9/11 happened. But it's turning 20 this year. Another incredible Jay-Z album, another one of his classics, as many of us would attest to. So what can fans expect from this recording in relation to what you all did with Reasonable Doubt? Are we getting the same bag, or is it going to be a little bit different?
Chris, you want to take this first, or?
I think it's going to be different. Brooklyn's Finest, the making of Reasonable Doubt, respectfully, is our Reasonable Doubt. It's a one of one. In order to make Reasonable Doubt again, you would need the same people, and the same kind of environment and circumstances. So definitely expect something different. We're still focused on quality, still focused on telling the story, but the Blueprint is a totally different album. It was created differently, different place in time, from the studio to where we were in the world at that time. So you can expect that to just be reflected in this series. But focus on storytelling, quality, from the production to the way it's written. That's a Breaking Adam's hallmark. No compromise on quality and storytelling. But it will definitely be a bit different, and we've done it now. So I'd like to think this is our sophomore album. This is our volume 1. This is our supreme clientele. So there's going to be things that we're going to be better at. It's going to be more refined, a leaner package, and I'm really looking forward to unleashing it on the world very soon.
Awesome. Very cool. The trailer that you guys put out for that that was at the end of Reasonable Doubt. I was just like, oh boy, here we go. In the words of DJ Khaled, another one. I was like, okay.
You know what's funny? The day that episode 5 came out, I was in my kitchen where I'm at right now. Me and Sumit was talking, and we decided, because that was 2 months of solid work. I was mash up. Like, I'm married. We're both married. So, we thought, okay, series is done. We now need to go and find our wives and, reconnect and make sure the house is still ticking. Nice. And we said, all right, we're going to do Blueprint. We're going to take 2.5 weeks off, chill, whatever. Sumit messages me and just said, young guru wants to talk tonight. Like, okay, great. Man. Cool. So the day we finished episode 5, we're like, yeah, we're going to take 2 weeks off. We started the Blueprint 8 hours later. That same day.
Guru's a dear friend of mine.
That's right.
I've known Guru. Yeah, I've known Guru for 2009.
Wow.
I like to say I always get. I
think it's around about then.
Yeah, I met him at South
9.
by Southwest. I introduced him to
Wow.
I introduced myself to him. Said, "Hey, I'm Sumit. I'm Hip Hop Chronicle. Let's do an interview," and that blossomed into a really good friendship. And I wanted to get Guru on for Breaking Atoms, like just a regular podcast, and he just hit me. And I think it was we had just reached an episode, and he just hit me and just said, "So when we're doing this?" I was like, "We could do it in like a week or so." I said, "I've got a better idea. I'm gonna need you to do a blueprint." And he's like, "Okay, yeah, we can do it now if you want." I was like, "Give me a couple hours." So I said, "Chris, are you ready? Like, we could do this." And we just off the line. We spoke to guys, and Guru I'd see every year, but I haven't seen him because of the pandemic. So we end up speaking to him for like 3 hours, just a good 3 hours, and we got all that story, what you hear in the trailers, what we got through that conversation, and he blessed us, man. We were supposed to take a break, but what I've realized in Hip Hop Chronicle, and Chris as MC will always know, there are no days off, man. We as creatives, we never take time off. We'd like to, but we're always working because we're always striving to be better every day, and so we're always trying to go like, what can we do next? So Guru blessed us. He really blessed us with some real good information, and he's helping us to open up the doors to get more people. And like Chris said, we're really excited about Blueprint. I know the expectation has to be like Reasonable Doubt, but it's not. It's very different. It has to be very different. We can't just recreate. It will be like Jay said, want my old shit, buy my old albums. You want our old podcast? Listen to our old podcast.
There you go. Right.
Don't expect this is new. This is different, and everything will always be new. It'll always be who we are, but we're always looking at how we can. And I keep saying this a lot in this interview. It's how we can elevate. How can we move things forward? New techniques. How do we do that? How do we introduce new people in different ways? And also, how do we introduce people that we love and respect from the culture? And how do we let them win with us as well?
There you go, man. There it is. And Guru, who spent time at Howard here in DC, and a place that I know that he trained at was Omega Recording School in Rockville, that he got his his chops from. So that's a person that you definitely want to talk to when it comes to stuff like Blueprint. He's been working with Jay for quite a long time. So I'm definitely looking forward to the Blueprint series to hear some more gems, man, because the gems from the Reasonable Doubt series are what delighted me the most. So I'm definitely looking forward to hearing the gems from this Blueprint series. I got a lot of Jay super fans on my timeline, and they're my friends. So they love the Reasonable Doubt, and they're definitely gonna love the Blueprint series. So, man, just looking as well outside of that, just some of the artists that you all have interviewed within the last year. I mean, there was, of course, you guys had one with Pain in the Ass, who was a part of the Reasonable Doubt series. You all did an interview with Shaheem, Fourth Disciple, Evidence. I've seen another one with Big Pooh, Shay and Noir, OC, all these different other artists that you've interviewed. Just to give us a little bit of preview of what you all have with Breaking Atoms, aside from the Blueprint. What can we expect? Any other special projects coming up or artist interviews that are coming up that you want us to stay tuned for?
There's so much. The thing is, Brian, right? I'd love to tell you everything. I'll take it off mic. The thing is, and Chris, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. For me, I always move in silence. I like to move in silence.
Okay.
Right? Because one thing I've always learned, and this everything I've learned comes from blogging, right?
Yeah.
I would just pop up in New York. I won't tell people, I'm just pop up. Yeah. I'm at your office door now. Let's do this, right? And what I realized is sometimes with us, it's about let's do it. We can talk all day about what we're gonna do. Let's just do it and let the product speak for itself. Let the content speak for itself. So there is a lot, and there's more series. There's more projects that we're working on and different ideas because we're both very creative people. But for me and Chris, you can feel free. Me personally, I like to move in silence. That's why I don't talk too much on Twitter and I don't talk too much on Instagram. I just go, right, what are we doing? Let's do this and let's move. Because it's no shots at all because everyone energizes and pumps themselves up in different ways. But a lot of people use that as a way to kind of G themselves up, and that's fine. But for me personally, it's like, we're going to do this. Does it make sense? Let's have the committee. Let's have the quorum. Let's talk about this. Does it make sense? We're doing it. And just go ahead, because not a lot of people knew about Reasonable Doubt until like very, very late on. That who knew about the Reasonable Doubt project? Maybe a handful of people. We could probably count on our finger, but we just popped up and boom, done. So that's how I always like to move.
Okay. So the word for those who want to stay tuned is stay tuned. That's how you find
pretty
out.
Much. Sorry, I could have said that, but you know me, right?
No, it's all good. But that's the explanation is perfect, and that's how you keep people hooked, because when you keep them not knowing what the next thing is coming out, they know that, bam, stay ready so you don't have to get ready.
That's word to Sugar Free.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What I will say is at the end of Blueprint, you'll know what the next one is.
Nice. Okay. I'm staying tuned, so make sure y'all are doing the same. So last question, and then before we'll get into you guys really just getting your platforms out there again. So this is the Vault Classic Music Reviews on the Guest Lounge. We do classic albums, and we start from 20 years on out. We do 20, 25, and 30 years. This year, we're doing albums that were released in 91, 96, and 2001. The previous year, we did 95, 2000, and 90. So give us, each of you, and Chris and Sumit, your definition of a classic album, including the characteristics you think one needs to have. And then follow that up with, give me a personal favorite hip hop album that you think is a classic that others probably may not.
Okay. This is a good question.
It's a very good question.
Really good question. I think a classic album needs to have a core idea. And what I mean by a core idea, like a theme, whether it's in terms of the lyrics, the storytelling. First of all, it's got to have a story from top to bottom. You've got to take the listeners on a journey. I'm going to share something that Clark Kent said. It's got to be a complete thought. You look at albums like America's Most Wanted, Doggy Style, the canonical classics, the required listening. You go university, you got a list of books. This is what you need to read if you're going to be official. Hip hop is the same. This is what you need to hear.
Yeah.
Right. So those albums, Clark can argue they're all the same album because you can mix and match the songs. They all take you from a complete thought. If you take something away, it's different. So I feel that's what a classic album needs. Obviously, it needs to be impactful and influential. So, impactful. Public Enemy, Takes a Nation of Millions. Like, there's nowhere in the world you'll go where people don't know that album.
Yeah.
Influence, what's come after it. What albums has it inspired afterwards? And I want to make a point and say that, some albums are impactful and influential in their own ways. So I mentioned Public Enemy. That's a genre-defining classic, right?
Yes.
But I would argue something like Inner City Griots by Freestyle Fellowship or Below the Heavens by Blue and Exile, whilst it may not have that kind of worldwide impact, they're very influential. I'll say this. I don't think you'd get a Kendrick Lamar without a Blue. So, you need to look at it that way. And I also think time. Sometimes you need time. A classic album needs time to resonate, to grow, to find its place in the world. Someone like OC, who's one of my favorites, Jules just continues to grow. Its place in the world, it just continues to grow, and it just continues to get better. And I think that's what a classic album, I think those are the ingredients for a classic album. There's more.
Yeah, there's more. There's quotables because that links to impact. There's the production
sequencing.
There's absolutely sequencing. They're not necessarily hit songs, but songs that that stand out. They have to be like little. Like if we look at if we take a piece away from rap and just look at Thriller banged the day it came out.
Yeah,
right. It just absolutely. But American Gangster will grow on you. Right?
Yeah.
For people like us, like Chris mentioned Below the Heavens, I knew when I listened to Below the Heavens, like this is classic. You just feel it. It's a feeling. And there's another bit about there's a personal thing about this as well. So how it makes you feel, right? Because music is so subjective. Top 5, all these things can be interchangeable, right? So there's a piece around how it makes you feel as the listener. And it resonates with you, and it takes you on, like Chris said, in that journey. But there's a bit around how it makes you feel, because my classics might be different to Chris's, or might be similar to and different to someone else's. But Chris has kind of touched upon the key ones. But there's bits around sequencing plays a massive part.
Yeah,
like
go ahead. Sorry to cut you.
I was gonna say, look, if you look in recent times, look at Damn with Kendrick Lamar. He did the version where he did the raw sequence, the album version that came out, and then he flipped it. And I think just thinking about it now, some of that was actually purposeful to go, I could just flip the script and it would still sound as dope as it was. To play that Clark Kent theme of It's a Complete Thought, you could just flip the whole album and it still sounds dope. So let's play the Ninth Wonder track first and go all the way through. That's what makes a classic album.
Yeah.
Right? That's what makes a classic album for me. And that doesn't need to be someone it doesn't need to be a Tupac. It doesn't need to be the Nas. It doesn't need to be that. It could be Cellar Dwellers, right? It could be Exhibit, right? Restless is a great album. Great album. Fantastic album. It doesn't have to be the ones that you know. It doesn't have to be the superstar footballers that, I always look at football. It doesn't have to be Messi and Ronaldo.
Yeah.
It could be a Sergio Busquets, for example. So.
Yeah. And I think I want to add as well, there are albums that you may particularly love as a person that's really important to your journey and who you are, but that doesn't make it a classic. And that's okay. Everything doesn't need to be a classic. Like Focus Daily by Defari, I don't know if people would see it as a classic, and I'll go on to another album in a bit, but I love the album. It means so much to me. Like Bury Me With My Copy. It's a similar thing with Tracy Lee and Many Faces. And I made sure I told him that I said, this album to me, like you can't tell Christopher Mitchell's story without mentioning in this album. So yeah, classic albums are definitely subjective. But there are the albums, the culture we celebrate, and those go without mentioning.
I also think that word gets banded around so much, and I'm trying to think about why it does. And I think it's really about trying to find a kinship with other people, a community of other people. They use that word to go, you think it's classic too? Me too. Whereas we would just go, this is dope, man. This is so fire.
Dope, yeah.
Now it's like, it's classic. Yes, we're friends now. It's like this new generation's way of connecting with each other.
Yeah.
And in some ways, it has a toxic effect because it becomes very tribal, because our whole society has become very tribal. However, I feel like for now, why does it get banded around? One, people want to achieve that status because of the things like The Source had a massive impact on hip hop. Yeah. So having that 5 Mac and being a classic became part of the lexicon of of hip hop. So that becomes something that people want to aspire to. It's like the same reason why everyone puts CEO in their bio when they're not a CEO, because they want to aspire to that. And so the word classic becomes this thing where it's like this, like back in the day, 9 Lives, AZ 9 Lives was like a cult classic. And it was like a code word. You spoke to heads and you like 9 Lives. Oh, I do too. But when we want to say it goes classic, we like that. Nowadays, kids are saying classic in order to find that kinship with that one another and that community one another.
Yeah, indeed. Sometimes it's kind of hard just to get on the same page with people to recognize that an album is just dope, without even necessarily classifying it underneath that rating system, right? Where it's I think it's 3.5. Oh, I think it's 4. Oh, I think it's 5. Oh, I think it's 9 out of 10. So sometimes, and that kind of goes against just what I do. But I think my show is more so about personal feeling. I mean, because to me, like one of my personal classics for me is Reflection, Eternal Train of Thought with Quality and High Tech. And that to me, while may not be on if you're taking a public poll and opinion of people in regards to where an album stands at, some people will put a lot of albums in front of that. But for me personally, as you said, Chris, when Defari's album did for you, Tracy Lee album did for you, that really at a crucial point in time in my life when it helped me to get through some times. It really did. And I mean, the quality of the album aside, it is magnificent to me with High Tech's production and then qualities I'm seeing, but then also the guest spots that happened on there as well with De La Soul and Cool G Rap and Rod Digga and Exhibit. I could keep going. So some albums mean more to other people than others. And while some may not classify them as classics, but it really does, as you said, a lot of it is subjective when it comes to whether you think an MC is better versus another one, or why one album means more to you versus another one. So it is really all subjective, but I just always like to get the opinion from other hip hop heads as far as what makes a classic to you, and then what's something that you treasure more so than other people may not necessarily see as a gem. So definitely appreciate y'all for that, man. But hey, we're at the end of this here. I want to thank you all again for joining us. And before we go, we want to make sure that you get your links out there, website, social media links, YouTube channels, whatever you want to promote. Go ahead and put them out there so that the folks who are watching and listening can go ahead and check y'all out, and Breaking Atoms or anything else that you want to put out there, man. Go ahead and throw your links out and your social media handles.
Okay, so I'm Chris Mitchell, but my MC name is Kinetic. All my handles, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, is I Am Kinetic. That's KINETIK. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. That's where you can find me. And reach out. I'm friendly and approachable, supposedly.
Very cool, man. Very cool. Sumit?
Yeah, so Break the Atoms, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook for the podcast. My personal handle is at Hip Hop Chronicle. Find me everywhere at Hip Hop Chronicle. That's where you can find me.
There you go. Sumit Sharma and Chris Mitchell of Breaking Atoms podcast. I'm telling y'all, man, go check it out if you haven't checked it out. You should be following, subscribing, anything that you talk about, man. These fellas put in the work. And then you put in the work as a creative, especially for my creatives out there that are following the show. You'll definitely appreciate the quality and level of work that goes into this, because we all know the amount of work we all put into it. These fellas out here do layman's work, and then they turn out a wonderful, wonderful product. The Reasonable Doubt series is great, but their regular artist interviews that you hear, the names you heard earlier, make sure y'all go check it out, man. Break the Atoms podcast. Make sure you're following them, checking out the website, checking out the social media, and then follow them individually. Chris and Sumit, thanks you all once again, and I'll be on the lookout for everything else, man. Y'all have a great one, and we'll stay tuned.
Thank you for having us. Thank you
so much, man.
And there you have it. A big shout out once again to Sumit and Chris of the Breaking Atoms podcast for coming in and shedding a little light, not just about the Reasonable Doubt series, but also about all the things that they've had going on with their podcast, and also reflecting a little bit of light on their journey as hip hop fans as well. Definitely appreciate them for coming through. Again, if you're on Twitter or Instagram, make sure you go check them out at Break the Atoms. And of course, make sure you're subscribing to that podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. They have great, great content, especially go through their back catalog. Check out the Brooklyn's Finest series. And of course, they got the Blueprint series coming out too. Make sure y'all go check that out, and all of their artist interviews. Really, really dope content. And I thank them once again for taking the time to letting us interview them. And that is going to wrap up yet another edition of The Vault. Please make sure you are checking us out on our new host on Red Circle. You can also download, stream, and subscribe to The Vault Classic Music Reviews on any one of our streaming sources. If you go to the bio in any one of our social media pages, you'll see the link tree. There you'll get to all of our social media sources and, of course, all of our streaming platforms. Again, you can get to The Vault Classic Music Reviews on Instagram on @VaultCMR Podcast, on Twitter @Vault Classic, and on Facebook and YouTube by searching The Vault Classic Music Reviews Podcast. Go ahead and like the Facebook page, subscribe to the YouTube channel, interact with us here on social media. We do it here all for you. We appreciate the support, and if you have a friend, tell a friend, and make sure that that friend tells a friend. Always remember to keep your headphones on and your music loud, but not too loud. And as we close, we'd like to remind everyone to dream big, because dreams are the basis for creation. Always create, motivate, and elevate, because you were never destined or created to stay stationary in this life. And on that note, we say peace.
Thank you for listening and coming into The Vault. Please subscribe and follow us on Facebook at IV Creative and Instagram at IVECRE8.